So we rolled through that roadblock, and we went to that land, and that's where you get your slogan, free the land, right? And when we got on that land, people started eating the dirt, you know, and they were doing things. Because this was the heaviest moment in most of our young lives. See, talking that stuff is interesting, right? That's the way, you know what I'm saying? Right. You can talk it all you want. You can be the greatest theoretician in the world. You read all the books. But when you're out there facing Goon Jones, then you got a slightly different situation, right? And so when they backed down, then the word went out all over the airways, all over the country, man. It went faster than we could ever make it go, right? That we had pierced the veil, and then all those signs were set around by the Klan. The Klan had all the kind of signs I'm talking about. We giving niggas free 6-foot holes here today, right? So you saw some of the pictures of brothers there with the gun and everything, right? Well, we was prepared to give a few 6-foot holes ourselves, if necessary, right? So we wasn't taking none of that, right? And so they all backed down. They all backed down. The black radio station at that time, which was WOKJ, they got on and people started calling in and said, we don't know where these people come from, but Jesus must have sent them, right? Jesus must have sent them, right? Because this was a phenomenon. It was a phenomenon in the spirit of our ancestors. It was a phenomenon in the spirit of Geronimo Pratt, who had come from Morgan City, Louisiana, and who had helped organize the Deacons for Defense. But it was the reason why, later on we get to talking about Tyrone Lewis in August of 2011. We'll get to that in a minute. And so what happened is that they were embarrassed. They were terribly embarrassed. And so they decided then, the FBI did not respond openly to A.F. Sumner. A.F. Sumner sent out an open letter to the FBI and said, FBI, come help us. We've been invaded by a bunch of foreign people, right? And so in other words, we were just regular black folks. Many of them lived in Mississippi. But when you got to acting like that, you had to be foreign, right? And so, so he said we have an informed base. So the FBI did not respond. The Attorney General of the United States did not respond openly, but he responded in fact. So they set up what they call a COINTELPRO conspiracy to destroy the Republic of New Afrika. They already were working on destroying Martin Luther King, disrupting the NAACP, had already shot up all kinds of Panther headquarters, killed Fred Hampton in 1969 in Chicago. This was sport for them, trying to kill us. So they had to kill the RNA. The RNA was a little different because we didn't, first of all, have a philosophy of standing in a building and trying to defend the building. Our philosophy was to get out of the building, and if anybody was trying to shoot us, get a better shot at them, okay? And so it was a little more difficult. We also were connected with people legally, and we tried to do things in a way which would not provoke problems, but we tried to solve problems. And so what happened though was the August 18th, 1971 was the culmination of their conspiracy to try to wipe out the RNA. The FBI had put an informer in our midst who had also been an informer for the Black Panther Party. And we're going to hurry this up a bit, but I think it's important for you to understand it, because you should see the myth story of this is what the Jackson Police Department has been trained on for the last 20 years or so, right? When they come in, they get mistrained. They start telling them about how dangerous people are, like the RNA, right? The RNA was probably the most hated organization in the history of white supremacist Mississippi, at least the recent history, okay? And because what happened is we stood up for our rights. But what they did is that they put this informant in the group, and they knew there was this fella that was wanted for murder out of Battle Creek, Michigan. It had nothing to do with us. But what they did is they told the informer to go get him and talk him into joining the RNA. And they talked him into joining the RNA 6 months before August, or right after the March incident. Right after, it might not have been 6 months, but it was right after the March incident. So they talked him into joining RNA in Milwaukee, and then they talked him into coming south. So they knew where he was 6 months before he hit Mississippi, you see what I'm saying? But they were going to use his presence in Mississippi as an excuse to raid the RNA headquarters and to shoot up the RNA headquarters. It just so happens that he was a brother that lacked a lot of discipline and really couldn't help do what we were trying to do. So he was asked to leave, and he had left 2 days or so before the actual attack. They had actually planned on launching the attack, interestingly enough, on August the 21st, which is the same day they killed George Jackson, okay? Way out in California, in San Quentin. But they decided to launch the attack a couple of days early because they found out that this man had left the headquarters and they needed a reason to go in, so they had to act like they thought he was still there, right? So they went out to the house, shot up the house on Lewis Street, and shot up another house on Lynch Street. This is right here in your communities, right? On Lynch Street and Lewis Street. Robert Smith, famous black doctor right here, lived right next door to the RNA house. They almost killed him and his family. And they shot the house up. Wasn't a black person to be seen on the force. The force was lily white, except for one black guy who they didn't bring that day, who would go around the black community. He had the right to beat up blacks in the black community, but couldn't arrest whites in the white community at that time, okay? And so they shot the house up, but the brothers and sisters fortunately were able to defend themselves. One cop was killed, one FBI agent was wounded, and one cop was wounded. And so that led to the long, bitter struggle that we call the RNA 11 trials and incident. Some of those brothers stayed in jail for as long as 10 years, and there were, first of all, in that picture that you saw where they're all in chains, that's a real picture, that wasn't a staged picture. They were being led down the street almost nude. There was 3 women in the house. One of the women was 6 months pregnant. The other woman was, well, both women were wives of 2 of the men that were in the house. And so they tried to kill everybody. And then after that, they tried to beat them and everything, thanks to Rosa Parks, who at that time worked in the office of Congressman Conyers in Detroit. We were able to contact her, and then she contacted Conyers, and they called Congressman Conyers. And then what they said was they really weren't beating them up, but they would stop anyway. Okay, that's what they said. Okay, but they were able, so Rosa's intervention helped save their lives once they had been arrested. Imari was actually arrested in the house on Lynch Street where no shooting occurred. He was able to step out on the street when he saw members of the faculty of Jackson State University who had an early meeting that morning. They were on the street and they were looking. And despite the fact that the police were trying to get them off the street, they refused to move, right? And so when he saw them out there, he walked out into the street, figuring that they would not dare to kill him in front of these people. So fortunately, no shooting occurred. So they tried and convicted in front of juries that some of us sat on. Okay, now this is a thing you have to understand. Because the thing that tells the story about our oppression is not just merely Klansmen. It's not just merely wild police officers and sheriffs who will try to kill you or highway patrolmen who will try to murder. It's the use of the official mechanisms of the government, the courts, people like Bobby DeLauder that we unfortunately voted for until we found out he was an absolute crook, right? And of course, we were telling you every year not to vote for him, but people were voting for him. Some of our people were voting for him. Absolute crooks. And then we have the infamous sheriff who has just left office, okay? That we were hanging on because he gave some people jobs, and he said he talked nice to some people, but at the same time had the same interest in mind. We have to understand that, because if we don't understand that, then we don't understand the story, right? Okay. We don't understand the story. The story becomes useless if you walk and wait for somebody to run down the street in a Klansman robe, right? None of these folks were wearing Klansman robes. Many of them probably were Klansmen, but they weren't dressed that way. And so what the deal was is that after a period of about 10 years, some of that last RNA 11 got out of jail. Just this month, just a few days ago, Ofaga Quadis, who was one of the people in the home that was shot up and one of the people convicted who had to go to jail for 10 years, he just died. He died of a stroke up in Memphis, Tennessee. He was an ex-serviceman. He had actually served in the Marines before he became involved with the Republic of New Afrika. None of these people had records, by the way. You weren't talking about criminals. You're talking about people like Hakima Anna who used to be the head of the poverty program, was at the time of the incident, the head of the poverty program in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Right? Talking about Tamu Sanaana, his wife, who had just come back from a trip from Africa. Talking about young brothers who, Lil Karem Mujabafudi, wound up being one of the best boxers around. And various different people. Some of the people was from young as 14 years old or 13 years old up until Imari, who I think at that time would have probably been in his 40s or his 50s. Imari served time in jail, even though he wasn't even in the house where the shooting occurred. They claimed that somehow he moved the people in the house where the shooting occurred to shoot, you know. And so that would, and you know where that conviction occurred of him? Not in the Mississippi court. Mississippi dropped the case because they thought it was ridiculous. The United States government prosecuted the case. Moved the case from Jackson, where there was too many blacks, they fell, down to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, where only one 78-year-old brother who couldn't stay awake during the trial was on the jury. And they convicted Imari and sent him away, right? There was all these famous judges and stuff on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal who ignored our pleas. But eventually the RNA-11 were free. Ofaga just recently died in August of 2011. And so why do I say that Tyrone Lewis's election in many respects is a result of what occurred back then? First of all, Tyrone Lewis's election is not free. All right, you should understand that, okay? You should understand that. That is not free, all right, okay? Chokwe Lumumba's election is not free. Those things are not free. Don't get confused. What they are steps in a process, tactics in a war, where we have to take offensives in order to get control of certain space and places, in order to try to force the hand of liberation, in order to improve, first of all, to fortify the economy of our people, so we stop losing so many people, and that we can draw some people in. You're talking about Dupree running for governor, and you should all go out and vote for him, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Because first of all, it's a referendum to see where we are. But you're not going to convince any white people to vote for Dupree, right? I mean, you're going to convince the same few white people to come to our rallies to vote for Dupree, right? You can count them on one hand. If they had one here now, I'd let them speak, you know what I'm saying? But you're not going to convince people to vote for Dupree like that. But if he wins, good. But if he doesn't win, then what we have to understand that the struggle is this. We got to fortify Jackson. We got to fortify Hines County. We got to fortify. We live in the western side of Mississippi. All up and down Mississippi, there's 17 predominantly black counties. You understand what I'm telling you? Where the sheriff should be black, where the supervisor should be black. That's a big enough area for economic expansion and development. And if you develop enough economic expansion and development, not only do you stop your own children from leaving, but what you do is you draw all the children in here. And then you create the ability, especially if you have alliances with the Latinos that's coming in and things of that nature, in order to shift, to have a realistic, you know, everybody was talking about how wonderful my election was. All my election was an exercise in practical reality. That's what it was. I lived in a ward that was 25,000 people. Only 700 of them were white, right? Okay. If it was anything, if it was different, then I wouldn't be standing up here being called to counsel, all right? So we're not looking for, you know, we want some miracles, but we got to make our own miracles, right? We got to make our own miracles. We got to make our own things work. And so in terms of the RNA-11 stand, it was a very important stand, because it told the system that we had passed the point where black folks were going to be preyed upon, and we were going to accept it in a so-called quote-unquote peaceful manner, right? Long before the RNA-11, we had resistance from various different forces in Mississippi and various different places. But the RNA-11 became the most famous resistance, the one that was best known around the world and around the state. The Deacons for Defense resisted. Brothers and sisters up in many of these counties resisted. But that resistance, you know, marked a turning point in the way that they had to do. And so what they did in one hand is start hiring black people on the police force. Black cops owe their jobs to the RNA-11, right? Okay. That's what they owe their jobs to. because they would not have been hiring them if it wasn't for trying to create a counterforce to a movement which was saying, we're not going to take anymore. Right? So as we pass by this 2011 Black August, remember these brothers and sisters who stood so bravely and who were willing to give their lives. And remember, even more importantly, that they saved their lives. Because we can't just celebrate people who get killed, right? We got to celebrate people who live and who do whatever's necessary in order to keep living, right? And so we want to celebrate Brother Imari Obadele, Sister Imari Bubakari Obadele. We want to celebrate Sister Aisha Ishtar Salim. She was from Philadelphia. We want to celebrate Brother Spade de Mau, who is actually Margaret Walker Alexander's son, okay? We want to celebrate Brother Tarim. We want to celebrate Brother Hekima, Brother Ofaga, Sister Njeri. We want to celebrate Sister Tamu. We want to celebrate Brother Karim and Brother Chuma Imari. So those are names that are frozen in my heart, and hopefully they will be frozen in yours, so you will realize when you hear these stuff. There's one crazy man that's on conservative white talk radio around here, and if you ever have the accident of listening to him on the station, he talks all day about, you know, well, he's trying to call himself disrespecting me, so he won't call me Chokwe Lumumba. He calls me Clarence or somebody. I don't remember what he said. Somehow or another he got a hold of a name that never did belong to me, but he thinks it's me. And said I was one of the people that killed the officers on Lewis Street. No, I wasn't, okay? But I certainly was their brother. I certainly was their comrade. I certainly was their defender.